Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Pacer Performance High 5 cab lights for a 2022 Chevy 3500. Many larger factory trucks come standard with cab lights, and generally that's required on trucks that are 80 inches wide, and that's to let people on the road know that a wide vehicle is coming through. Well, this one is not 80 inches wide, but could be towing a pretty wide load, and also it's just a larger vehicle. And let's be real, cab lights are a very nice aesthetic touch to a truck. It does give it that nice kind of beefier big rig look to it. And these ones in particular, the smoke option gives it a little more stealthy look. Now this is available also in amber lenses as well. They all have the LED amber lights, but you can kind of go for a little more stock look if that's what you want. But the smoke I think is pretty sharp looking. Now being LED, they're going to be pretty efficient. And also they have a lot longer lifespan than your normal incandescent bulbs, so you're not have to worry about fiddling around with bulbs burning out. Now if this style of lights looks familiar, that's because it's modeled after the 2015 to 2019 GM and Chevy trucks that are generally on their 2500 HDs or their 3500 HDs. So it is nice in the fact that it does have that OEM look, but it's really great because that smoke kind of sets it apart from some of those factory ones. Now it is also shaped to contour to the shape of your roof. So while it is somewhat of a universal fit, it is brand specific, and that reason being it is going to contour to your roof line. Now it does have a nice foam pad underneath that is going to seal up with the bracket mounted underneath it when you tighten it up. So that way you're not going to have any water leaking through the holes that are drilled. Now as far as installation goes, you are going to be drilling through the roof of your truck. And so it's going to really come down to making sure that you measure it out perfectly before making those drill marks. And in the instructions, there's a kind of basic template that you can use, but really it's going to come down to getting sure right where you want to be and double, triple checking before you drill those holes. The rest of the kit is pretty straightforward, as the wiring is included, as well as the ways to make the connections by snapping them together with a wire crimp. I've actually opted to put a little bit different setup than what comes in the kit, as this one does have an on and off switch, which is great. You can turn it on whenever you want or turn it off. We've actually opted to tie into our fuse panel of the running lights. That way when you turn your running lights on, they're going to come on at the same time. We've also put a relay in place to make sure that if these ever fail, it's not going to knock out your clearance lights. It's totally up to you on the installation, but I'm going to walk you through how to get these mounted up and get them wired. So let's take a look at that. The first step of installation is going to be determining where we're actually going to mount it up. Now, generally you kind of follow having this centered up and these kind of a little bit offset back. And what I've done is use tape just to kind of give us a nice layer to work with and also make marks where our mounting bolts are going to go through. So what I've done is kind of mock these up in a fashion that I think will work. Because of that antenna, we're going to have to go on the outside of that. So I've just kind of mirrored that image on the other side. So first things first, find your center, and you're going to want to denote where that center mark is for our center light. From there, we can start getting our measurements. Now I've gone ahead and I've gotten our measurements set up where our mark's going to be drilled, so I'll go ahead and walk you through those. That way if you're happy with the way that they look installed, you can actually use those same measurements. So starting on our passenger side, I'm going to give you the measurements of our drill marks where our studs are actually going to go through. So I started here at the line, and coming down right at our windshield here, right at the crack, it's going to be 6.5. Now it is contoured, so going from the center mark, I'm going to go on the inside portion here of the tape measure. So 6.5, and our back hole is going to be 7.5. So we have our distance. Now as far as our width goes, you can see from the center line to the outside of our rain gutter is exactly 4 inches, and that continues on the one above. So I've gone ahead and mirrored those same measurements on the driver's side, so make sure that that is good. Now the center one, first off, find your center mark obviously, but I actually took the center light and I put a little bit of tape underneath on the screws or on the bolts just to make sure it's not scratching our paint. But I've made little marks and where I've determined those to go is actually 19 inches from that mark to the inside edge of the rain gutter here. Now I'll go on the other side and double check to make sure that we have that same measurement. But let's get our distance. And we're looking right at 7 inches from the in between the windshield and the roof line to our mounting hole there. So let's check the other side. We have our 6.5, our 7.5, our 4 inches. And in fact, this one I see is a little bit out, so I'm going to just move that mark just a hair over to the center. But let's go ahead and get our center mark here, or center light mark, I should say. And it's going to be tricky here with the antenna, so you're going to want to kind of eyeball it here because this rain guard does start to curve out. That can actually alter where that measurement point is. So just kind of put that right above it, and we should see 19 inches. So now that we have our measurements made, we need to make sure that there's no interference underneath our roof liner. And that way we're not just drilling holes and hitting something that might be important. Because we do have our antenna here, we also have this center kind of, you have your lights there as well as sometimes a sunglass holder, basically that upper center console. We want to make sure we're not hitting that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull a little bit of this roof liner down. That way we can make sure that it's actually clear, and it's going to help us run our wires a little bit later. So let's hop in the vehicle and start pulling the interior apart. So upon first glance, there's going to be a few things that we're going to need to tackle. So we do have this little center console area. We also have our visors as well as these handles on the A-pillar. Now, we are going to be running power eventually to the fuse in the engine bay. So having this A-pillar panel kind of off is going to help us run that wire down. So I'm going to start here. Now I'm using a very small flathead screwdriver. A plastic trim removal tool works also very well here. It's going to keep it from marring up, but some of ours might be a little bit too thick. So a small little flathead should be able to pop this panel open. Just kind of take your time with this. There's no real major big gaps to be able to kind of get into it. So it can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to kind of just work my way around the edge and see if we can't. There we go. Right at that corner I was able to get underneath there. And then it kind of pops out pretty easy. Go ahead and do the same on this side. Here we are. And make sure you hold on to all your interior panel pieces as we remove them, as well as the hardware, because we'll need that for reinstallation. So you can see our bolts here. We'll go ahead and get our ratchet, and we'll get these taken off. So these are going to be a 10 millimeter. We'll go ahead and get these off. Now we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the passenger side. Now we're going to take our window shade here, and you're going to see, it's going to be kind of hard to see, there's a little split, and that's going to allow us to actually get this off. So I was able to use just my fingernails here, and I can work this out this way, and there's that split. You can kind of just take that off, and that's going to reveal we have some Torx bits here. Looks to be, I would say, a T15. Let's check. T15 is going to be the ticket. So there's 3 of those there. We'll go ahead and get those removed. With those 3 out, we should see these little white clips here, and those are kind of holding this in. So I might need to take my flathead here and try to pry those back. There we go. So working from the outside, pushing that tab in, it's just a little white clip there. In fact, we might be able to get this side now that that one's popped. So you can see here, these are our clips that just kind of snap in. So if you pry those back, it's going to take it off the teeth there. Now we have this out. We can set this aside somewhere where it's not going to get dirty or scuffed up. So to get this center portion opened up, you see there's an L or a J shape, depending on how you're looking at it. But we'll go ahead and pry this up a little bit. Oop. There we go. Once we get one edge, we can kind of work our way up. Go ahead and do the same on the other side. And you can see that's going to reveal some Torx bits. It looks like it is a T15 yet again, so we'll be able to get those loosened up with our same driver. And those are actually a little bit smaller than a T15, so let's go ahead. I'll figure out the size for you. So now you're going to want a T10 Torx bit driver here, and we're going to go ahead. We're going to take these two out. Let's see if we have any movement here. That might still be attached, but we do have two more that are actually tucked up in here. So let's go ahead and get those loose. So now that we have our screws taken out, you're going to see this little slot, the rectangle, that's going to allow us to get our flathead in there. And we should be able to just get that popped. There's also one on the other side, so go ahead and do that as well. And we'll just be careful here. We do have this switch here, which makes me think we might be getting caught on that. So let's take a look and see what we got going on. We might have to slide it down. So kind of working at this, I tried here pulling on this actual whole housing here, and it does seem like that's where we're going to be able to pop this down. But again, I'm going to kind of move slow, make sure that we're not pulling anything down that could cause damage. Main thing is this switch seems like it's holding up the party here as it's catching. So now prying here, it does seem a little scary, but there's going to be clips right here and on this as well. And so once those pop down, you're going to see we have our center portion taken out. Now, since we're going to be just dropping this a little bit to gain access, you can kind of leave this hanging down. We're not going to be removing the entire headliner, so this should be fine. These wires seem like they are protected enough to be able to support that. So great thing here is we are going to be able to see kind of where our drill marks are going to be, but we're going to continue on, and we're going to be taking off this clip here from our actual mirror, or I'm sorry, our sunshade. Now, on the back side, there's going to be a small little slot, and that's where our flathead's going to go. And just simply pop that open. And that little piece comes out, so make sure you hold on to that. Now, it does look like we have another Torx bit there, and this one looks to be a T15. You can see this clip actually wants to hang there, but that's gained us the movement that we need to be able to see under there and route our wires. So we're looking pretty good here. Now, as far as our A-pillar plastic, we may need to take a little bit of this trim, the rubber gasket here, and just kind of peel this back. And that's going to kind of gain us a little more to be able to pry this out. Using our handle here. There's going to be clips on these as well up here, so you may have to put some pressure. Now, if you have a panel removal tool, sometimes these help get in there and you can kind of pop those clips open, but with a little bit of even pressure, we should be able to get this to open up. So the clips actually are pretty far over this way, so using a trim panel tool or a flathead, kind of get underneath there. And we're just going to kind of pry this until we hear that pop. Now, as far as installation of this being a new vehicle, there's not a whole lot out there. So looking at some other resources, it seems like this is a common issue with this being a little bit tricky. So just take your time, make sure you're not breaking any of the plastic, but we'll get this separated with just a little bit more patience. There we go. So as you can tell, it took a little bit of force, but getting my hand on that top side there, those clips just go into this metal with these metal teeth. So yeah, it takes a little bit of force here. You can see mine kind of pried it back a little bit more than I wanted, but this metal clip should go further in when we go to reinstall, and it should clip back in place no problem. So let's take a look here. We'll peel this back, and as you can tell, we have access to our roof. So make sure you have it done all across on the driver and passenger side, and then we can start making our drills. Now you're going to want to go ahead and make sure you have extra tape around the whole edge, because as we drill, you don't want your drill bit to walk around and cause any damage to your paint. Now, to give you a little easier way to get that drill bit started, you're going to take a punch, and right where our holes are marked, we're going to go ahead and just put a little dimple there. Go ahead and do that on the other. Now go ahead and drill your pilot hole. Now make sure when it does actually go through that you're stopping the drill. That way it's not going to catch your headliner. You might also want to make sure you have something there to keep your headliner down. That way it doesn't catch as it goes through. Now you're going to want to grab your light as well as this backing plate. The backing plate actually has 3 holes, and that's going to be for that wire to pass through. So orientate your light in the position that it should be facing forward, and you're going to see that this bracket has it slightly offset where those wires will pass through. So just kind of line it up, figure out which way is the proper orientation, and you can see that it is closer to that front hole. So what I'm going to do is take our bracket here. I'm going to line it up with the holes that we just made, and then I'm going to drill just a small pilot hole through the wiring. That way we have it lined up perfectly when we enlarge the holes. So now we have our 3 holes drilled. I'm going to go back and enlarge where the studs are going to go through. We're also going to want to enlarge that wire hole just a little bit to allow those wires to be able to pass through. Now we're just going to test fit to make sure that it does drop into place. And that's pretty good. I have my wires up, so we'll be able to pull this tape up and then feed our wires and then our studs through. Now if there's any shavings here, you're going to want to make sure that you vacuum or blow them off. Don't try to brush them off with your hands. That way you, A, don't get any metal splinters, but also you don't scratch your clear coat. Feed our wires through. Now if you do have sharp edges where you drilled through for the wires, you might want to take a little punch and kind of just work that around just to kind of smooth those edges out, or if you have a very small file that you can get in there, that might be worth doing. Line your studs up, and that should drop in place. Now once you have that in place, you can go ahead and take off the plastic, and then you're going to want to grab that same plate that we used to make the markings, and this is going to go underneath. Now, before we do that, we're going to want to attach a ring terminal to the ground. Reason being, we're going to use the stud to actually attach it before this goes on. That way there's metal to metal contact for that ground. You can actually attach all of them together and have one common ground, but I think having one on each and knowing that it's going to be nice and sandwiched in there, and hopefully our ground shouldn't come apart, and that's going to be a nice secure connection. So I'll go ahead and grab my ring terminal and I'll show you how I do that. So now we're going to take our wires here and we're going to pass them through the bracket. Okay, now with our wires pulled through, we can feed this bracket up and put it on the studs. Now there is a weld here, and I think that bracket is actually going to sit in there pretty decent as long as I feed this front edge in first. And it's going to be hard to see right away, but I'll show you how it kind of sandwiches in there. All right, so now we have our bracket on. We'll go ahead, we'll be grabbing our flat washer and the supplied nut that's in the kit. We'll go ahead and hand tighten this on just to kind of get that in place. And I'm going to do the other one as well. And this is going to be a 5/16. So if you have a ratcheting 5/16 wrench, that's probably going to be your best option for getting these tightened down. So there you can see that part of the bracket kind of feeds underneath this welded portion. So it actually kind of works out well. You do have to kind of feed that in through the front, but it fits in perfectly. So now that we have those hand tightened on, we'll go ahead and tighten these down with my ratcheting wrench. Now you are going to want to tighten these down to where it's pretty snug, because that's going to compress the foam that's actually underneath the light and give you a better watertight seal long term. But you also don't want to go too tight to where you're actually going to damage the light. So just go ahead and you'll feel it snug up, and then give it a few, maybe a quarter turn or a half turn, just to kind of make sure that this is in place. There we go. Now I'm going to double check my front one just to make sure that they're evenly tightened. With that tightened down, we're going to go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. So now we're going to do the same process on our center light. Now the wires are offset to the driver's side. So on our passenger side, we're just going to simply make our indentation, and we can go ahead and make that pilot hole. So now we're going to grab our plastic washer that goes on the back side of the center light, and you're going to see it does have that wiring hole going through it. Both of them do, but you're only going to use it, or at least that hole on one side. Being that it is on the driver's side, I'm going to line this up with the hole that we just piloted, and then I'm going to go ahead and make our hole for the wires to pass through. Once you have your holes drilled, just kind of give that a quick test fit there. And that looks good. So we'll go ahead and we're going to get some of these metal shavings off. We'll peel our tape off, and then we're going to feed our wires through, and then we're going to start making some connections. Feed our wires through. And then our mounting studs there. Get that sitting nice and flush. Now I see that my studs are actually catching a little bit on that side, so I'm going to go back with the drill bit and just kind of water that out a little bit so it drops in flush. So now we're going to take our plastic washers here and feed our wires through first. And then we can just run this up to that mounting stud. Now do be careful, because since we drilled through, there might be some metal flashing or some burrs hanging off. So just be careful that you're not cutting your fingers on that. We have that sitting there, so I'm going to go back with my washer and my nut just like before and get that hand tightened on. So now you can go back with your ratcheting wrench or socket and just tighten those down. So now we're going to take the black wire of our light, and we're going to be actually putting a ring terminal on here, and that's going to ground it. And I'm going to show you this one here just because it's going to be a little bit easier to see. But what we're going to be doing is taking a ring terminal, which it does not come in the kit. If you need to pick one up, we have these here at eTrailer. Your local hardware store will generally have them as well. This is going to make sure it's a nice secure connection on this metal. Now, the clips that come in there in the kit will say that you can attach them all and have a single ground. You can absolutely do that as well, but to not have to extend any more wires than we have to, this is going to make it a little bit easier. Now with ring terminals, there is going to be a flat side that's going to sit flush against the metal. It looks like we have plenty of space here, just kind of where all of our mounts are going to be. So I think if I just kind of put it, you know, right about here, that should be fine. It's nice and hollow on the other side, so it's not going to cause any issues with anything. And we're going to simply attach this with a self-tapping screw. Drill this into our metal here. And just make sure it's tight enough to where it's not going to move. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other two black wires. Now in the kit, they have snapped together connectors for our wires. I'm going to go ahead and use butt connectors, as I think they're a better connection overall. So what I've done is I've taken some of the extra wire length, which as you can see will easily reach our middle one. So I went ahead and clipped that. and then I've just attached that with a butt connector here. So I'm going to route this to our next power wire, and we're going to jump into that as well using a larger butt connector, larger gauge, because we have the 2 wires. And then from there, we're going to run another jumper with the extra wire, just with that butt connector, to the next one. And from there, all of our power wires will be attached, and then we can route it to the engine bay to actually get it power. So with our wire, we've ran that over here, and I've just attached it to our red power wire from the middle light. And you're going to want to leave a little bit of extra slack here because this wire on the light doesn't have a whole lot of movement. You're going to want to be able to still move this in a fashion to where it's going to be out of the way when we put this back up. Now there's plenty of space up there, so I don't worry too much, but it's better to leave yourself a little bit of room before making connections. So we have our wires twisted up there. I'm going to go ahead and put a butt connector on here. So now we're going to take the rest of that wire supplied in the kit, and we're going to just make sure we have enough to run to our outer light. Go ahead and make a cut. And then we're going to tie it into this butt connector. Now, if you'd like to, you can do a little bit of extra protection here, and that's just going to be wrapping this with an electrical tape just to kind of keep it all protected and from pulling apart. And that way, over time, it's just not going to kind of work itself loose. It's up to you. You don't have to do this step, but it gives me a little more peace of mind knowing that it's not going to just pull apart. So now just take your wire here and you're going to route it over to where our last light is. And we're going to go ahead and make the same connection with that butt connector. Now we're going to be taking the rest of this red wire and we're going to be routing it down the A-pillar here. Now once that's routed, this is when you can kind of decide how you want to get your lights to power up. So I have this wire and I'm just going to kind of run it down pretty easily down our A-pillar, as there's plenty of spots to kind of just run it along with the factory wires, and if you need to, you can throw a little zip tie on there just to keep it secure if you'd like. But once you have this run down, you're either going to be tying into your switch, and regardless, you're going to be tying into your power. So you're pretty much at a good point. If you want to, you can go ahead and get your interior put back together. Now the relay will only use the running light circuit as a switch. It then sends power from the battery or the accessory circuit that you choose to send the power from. That way, the only amperage of the taillight circuit is for switching the relay. Now this way, if for some reason, if you lose accessory power, you're only going to lose the cab lights because you're not drawing power from the actual running light circuit. You're only going to trigger it in the relay. Now, the other option is to use a fuse tap directly to the running light fuse. The downside is if both the fuses blow, you not only lose the cab lights, but you also lose the running lights on the vehicle until the fuses have been replaced. So this could be a dangerous situation if it occurred while driving. I do think that might be a rare occasion, but again, this way we know for sure it's only going to be essentially for the lights itself, and it's going to keep it separate. Now there is the switch in the kit, and that's going to work perfectly fine, but you are going to have to manually switch that on and off. So if you want this tied into the actual running lights, so when your running lights are on, the cab lights will be on, you can use a fuse tap, but that fuse tap has a fuse and you're actually going to have another inline fuse for that. So if the fuses fail for whatever reason, you're actually going to lose your clearance lights, your factory running lights as well. So if it's, you're driving at night and those fuses happen to blow, that could be a dangerous situation. So the relay acts as basically its own fail-safe to keep these lights working or triggered on when those running lights are turned on. But if there was to be a problem, the lights may not work, but you'll still have your factory clearance lights, and that's going to keep you safe. So our relay is going to live in the engine bay, and that's going to get us closer to not only our fuse panel, but also our battery. And in order to get this ran up to it, this is going to be a little bit too short because we're going to be running it through a grommet through the firewall. So where this spade connector is that normally goes into that switch, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut that off. So we'll be extending this wire. I have some spare wire here that we just kind of had on hand that's going to be long enough to for sure get us into the engine bay. If you are going the relay route, they do give you an extra included little length of wire here that should also work just fine. But I'm going to go ahead and use ours just because we do have plenty of it here. If you do need extra wire, we actually have that here at eTrailer. You can pick some of that up. But we'll go ahead and we're going to make this connection here with the wire on from our lights. So we'll go ahead and just splice this. And then we're going to put our butt connector on here. So with that connection made, my next step is going to be finding a grommet in the firewall. Generally, there's going to be one that's kind of tucked on the firewall by the pedal assembly. So I'm going to look under there, find our best route, and then we're going to fish this through to the engine bay and make our connection on the relay. So to get our wire through the engine bay, the grommets on this truck are not exactly super easy to find, nor is there a really large one, but I did find one, and that's going to be our hood latch release. So you actually have the cable passing through it, and there's a grommet that's a little larger than a quarter size, and I was able to pry that up, and I'm using just old airline tube that we have. It's slightly flexible, but I can push that through the grommet, and then what I'll do is on the opposite end actually tape that wire in. So we're just using this as a pull wire to get our wire passed through the engine bay. So if you have a skewer or a hanger, a metal hanger, even maybe a long screwdriver, you can simply tape that end onto it, peel back that grommet, and push it through. Now when it comes through on the engine bay, it is a little bit tricky, but I'll show you where it comes out at. So following this little line here, you're going to see the grommet's going to be kind of tucked up a little bit, but you're going to see a rubber plug with a hard wire, and if you follow this back, you're going to see it does go to the hood latch. So that's how you know it is the correct one. And you can see I just passed my airline through it and then just kind of fed a bunch through. That way there's excess on the other side. That way I know where to pull from. So here it's kind of hard to see, but we have in between our two reservoir tanks, you can see straight down there, this is kind of where it pokes out through, and it was kind of tricky to see, but once I fed enough, I could see that this was kind of looping around. And so now that I have a grasp on it, I can simply pull this through to get our wire. Now make sure whatever you're using to pass it through, whether it be that skewer or a hanger or a screwdriver, tape the end of that wire. That way when you're pulling through, it doesn't actually get caught and get stuck down there. So once you have that taped up, simply pull this through and get all your slack pulled out. Don't pull too hard, but now you'll have your wire closer to where you need it. So now that I've pulled this wire through, I'm just gonna kind of get that slack out gently. Remember, we do have a butt connector there, so if it gets a little tension, check the other side to make sure you're not pulling on that. You don't want that wire to separate. And once you have enough wire pulled through, we can probably just tuck this underneath this bracket of the reservoir and around here, and that's going to put us right where we need to be, the fuse panel, the battery, and it's going to keep it over here where we can mount our relay. So it's going to keep it looking nice and clean. You're not going to have a bunch of wires all over the place. So I'm going to make sure that I have all my slack pulled through, and then we'll start making our connection. Now, since we're going to be tying into the fuse panel, we have to find the fuse that this is going to work well with, and that's going to be obviously our running lights that we want it coming on at the same time. So looking at our panel, I've actually found number 42 is going to be our park light right. So there's also a left, but as long as you're tying into one of them, that should work no problem. Our 42 fuse is right here, this 10 amp, and I've gone ahead and tested it, and the way to you're going to want to double check as well. You're going to have a test light, put that on your negative, and you're going to test to make sure that you don't have any power while the lights are off, and then turning the light on, this should kick on. So you should know that that is the proper fuse that we're going to be pulling, and we're going to put our fuse jumper into there. So now that we kind of have a little bit of a plan here, I'm going to go ahead and grab our relay. Now I'm going to walk you through the wire coloring that we're using here, and that way you can kind of double check yours if you are doing a relay to know that you have the proper one. So here we have 5 different wires. So let's run through these. First, we have our red wire. This is going to be our power wire. Now this is going to get a ring terminal and go to the actual battery post to get that 12-volt supply. Our blue wire, we're not actually going to be using, so I've just gone ahead, wrapped that over and taped it up. Our green wire, I've gone ahead and attached our fuse jumper here. Now this is going to go where that fuse is on 42, plug into here. We're then going to put that fuse that we pulled to put this into place in here on the bottom. And then also included in the kit is going to be this 10 amp fuse, so those will both sit there, and that way it's protected. Moving along, we have, this is going to be our black wire. This is going to actually go to the wire that we extended. So this is going to run to our lights. And then finally, we have a ground. So this can go to the negative on the battery, or you can find a spot to self-tap this ground on. I've gone ahead and put that ring terminal on. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start making these connections. And then once we have it all laid out, I'll show you kind of how it looks. Now for the butt connectors that I'm using under the engine bay, I'm actually going to be using heat shrink ones, and that's simply going to just give a little added protection because the engine bay is prone to, being wet or seeing moisture. These actually kind of cinch up once you heat them down, and that's going to keep that connection protected. And also it just gives it a little extra hold overall. So with these crimped down, we'll go ahead and get our heat gun on there. Now if you need heat shrink butt connectors, we have these here at eTrailer. They are really nice for a lot of different projects, especially on any electrical that, again, might be prone to seeing any wet conditions. So I've gone ahead and I've cut off the extra wiring that we had as our pull-through wire, and that's just going to take some of that slack out so we don't have to loop it around in the engine bay. And so we'll be attaching that to the black wire on our relay. So now on our red wire, this is going to be our power wire that's going to the battery. We're going to attach a ring terminal. Now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to mount it to this post on the positive of our battery, and it does look like it's going to be a little tricky for that wire to run out and have this still clipped down. I'm going to try to run it here and see if it still has room to do that, but for now let's take this 10mm off and get our ring terminal on. So now we're going to pull that 42 fuse that we tested earlier. Now we're going to want to actually get a micro fuse tap, as the one that comes in the kit is not going to fit in the slot here. And the way this works is it just plugs in where that fuse was, and we're going to put the fuse that we pull in this bottom portion, and then the top one we're going to put a 5 amp fuse, and that way it's going to have that protection. And then this is going to butt connect to our green wire. So I'm going to go ahead, get our butt connector on here. And then we'll attach it to our fuse tap. Now we're going to hold tight in putting our fuses in and plugging this in until we're completely hooked up to power. So we're going to move along here so we can set this one aside. So now all that we really have left here is going to be our negative and our power. So let's go ahead, we'll get our negative put on the negative terminal, and then we can get our power put on. So now we can take our power and place this on our power, or our positive terminal post here. We'll get that on there and tighten that down. So now we can grab our fuse tap. We're going to go ahead and put our 10 amp fuse that came with it, or the one that we actually pulled here. We're going to put that on the bottom. And then we're going to put our 5 amp up top. And then from there, we can actually get this plugged in to our fuse slot. So now all of our wires are accounted for. It's a little bit of a mess here, so I'm gonna kind of tie these up, see where our slack is, and then we're gonna actually mount the relay. Probably gonna just do a self-tapper right here to kind of get it out of the way. But for now, I'm gonna tie these up, get a little bit of wire loom on there to clean it up, and then we'll get that mounted. So with a little bit of wire loom here, I just kind of tucked it up, make it look nice and clean, and all of our wires are out of the way. So now I need to mount up my actual relay here, and this seems like a good spot as there's nothing behind it here that it should make contact with. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a self-tapping screw and get that installed. Now with all of our electrical connections hooked up, we have all of our interior panels put back in, we're ready to test this out and see how it looks. So now to see what it actually looks like all powered up, and as you can see, it's got a nice clean appearance, but it also makes the truck have a little tougher look as well. That nice smoke looks great and subtle when the lights are off, but also it looks even better when the lights are on. And that was a look and installation of the Pacer Performance High 5 cab lights on a 2022 Chevy 3500.